afternoon, everybody, and welcome back for one of the Alen events in our full week of programming. I'm David Hendler, and Director for Alen. I'm not going to say too much, just introduce Jill Sanders. Jill is one of the 4 co-chairs of our programs committee, and we're very happy to have you on board for that. So let's get going. Welcome, Jill Sanders, please.
When David approached me recently about becoming the co-chair of the Program Leadership Council, I initially hesitated, and like all of you, we're all oversubscribed New Yorkers, and I thought, don't have time for this. But then I began to sort of research online, do some background information, checkups, and really was so impressed by the kind of roster of really innovative, provocative programming that's been happening at Alen. I mean, there's a long legacy of that, but I think particularly since David and the staff have come on, there's a kind of new energy and a really new perspective about thinking about critical and timely issues about the urban environment. So I sort of felt I can't say none of this. I want to become part of the kind of new energy of this institution. And I really think that the Alen, through programs like this, is really differentiating itself from other, dare I say, competing architectural organizations here in New York. And I think tonight's panel discussion, or I know tonight's panel discussion, is a case in point. And rather than have us focus on buildings or the built environment as objects, as art, as sort of aesthetic artifacts, which I think architects and designers have a tendency to do, I think this panel is sort of part of what I see as a kind of welcome shift, moving from not only thinking about design, but really thinking about human experience, or in this case, asking us to consider an activity that we, too often take for granted, but has sort of architectural and social consequences, and that's this phenomena of the commute. Also, these remarks are just extrapolating what I imagine might be happening tonight, but just the roster of cross-disciplinary panelists who are here tonight. I also suggest that one can't begin to think about even commuting without also thinking about the tremendous impact of new media technologies on how we kind of interact in public space or in public infrastructure, this kind of shuttling back and forth, this dialogue between the kind of actual physical infrastructure and the virtual language of digital information. And also, I was particularly, David and his staff said, well, why don't you come to some panel? And I chose this one because the topic is a particular interest to me. I teach at Yale, and I teach a seminar called Techno-Sensation, and it's trying to, again, ask students to explore the transformative impact of digital technologies on the spaces of our everyday lives. We look at homes, we look at schools, but I have a group who's looking at studying the subway and how people are interacting using mobile digital devices on the subway, and they found really interesting things like, obviously the most obvious one is how people sort of isolate themselves in sort of bubbles to kind of distract themselves in other worlds to escape the subway. But I thought the most interesting things that I wasn't so aware of in my time, in the old school, we used to sort of try to meet up by sort of exchanging glances. But they talked about this phenomenon where people sort of steal furtive glances at each other's sort of screens, knowingly and unknowingly, and have all these sort of voyeuristic or exhibitionist encounters. And other students sort of studied again how new apps like Tinder allow again this kind of sort of shuttling back and forth between what was for different kinds of sort of meeting on social exchanges. So I'm sure that Tinder will not be the subject of tonight's I hope it would be, but maybe we'll touch on it. But anyway, it was a great program tonight, and I'd like to introduce our moderator, David King. David is an assistant professor of urban planning at Columbia, and his research explores the impact of local transportation planning on the built environment, public finance, and accessibility.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you an overview of what will happen. I'm going to speak for a short period of time and introduce the program and some of the big themes, And then we have 3 speakers who are going to be presenting their own work and research. And the unifying theme that we're working on tonight is that of data. And data, we're not talking about big data, we're just talking about data. And the reason we're talking about data is because we're entering a period of transportation planning and policy that is focused on information as opposed to being focused on infrastructure. We can think about the current era of transport policy over the last 40 years or so has been one that is really focused on maximizing the amount of infrastructure available to ensure high-speed, door-to-door commutes that minimize travel time. And this has been why we build our freeways. This has been why we build our commuter rail. This is largely why we have our cities shaped the way they are. And we're at a point now, because of finance and because of technological changes, where building infrastructure is no longer the desirable policy solution. And what I mean by that is, as many of you certainly know, and as some of you may not know, our financing model in the US is largely dominated by the federal gas tax, which has not increased since 1993. And because of that, the amount of money the federal government has to spend on transportation has declined relative to our needs. And many of you have probably heard the American Association of Civil Engineers say that we have a $2 trillion deficit in our infrastructure spending. We need to spend that much money just to get our infrastructure up to a state of good repair. But of course, that assumes that all the infrastructure we have needs to be maintained and it needs to be fixed. And what we're realizing is that in the United States, in Canada, in Western Europe, in Australia, in Japan, in every developed nation, the amount of car travel has peaked. It peaked about 10 years ago and it's been declining. It's declining on a per capita basis. The total miles or kilometers traveled has remained relatively flat. And so we're seeing something else happen with our travel. And because of that, we need to think about new ways to approach the transportation policy arena. And the way to do that is through the information that we're collecting, the data that we're collecting. And the data that we're collecting now is stuff that was not available 10 years ago, certainly not available 20 years ago and before. So we have an opportunity for various reasons, various technologies to manage our transportation system more efficiently and more effectively. We can set different goals for our transportation system. We're now seeing an interest in cities of tearing down freeways, tearing down interstates, and reclaiming land that's been given over to the automobile for pedestrians and for cyclists. We have to also consider that now, as we're trying to affect behavior on our roadways through pricing mechanisms, through other behavioral changes, that people have more options about how to travel and whether or not they travel now than they ever have. We've been talking for decades about telecommuting as being a viable alternative to our commute. It wasn't until very, very recently, within the last 10 years, that we finally started seeing telecommuting become a major part of the work week. The federal government has been enforcing a policy of telecommuting for over a decade, but it's only been in the last 2 or 3 years that they've actually started to achieve their goals of all their employees who can are required to work out of the office 1 day a week. That has a tremendous effect on the number of cars on a freeway. In the Washington metropolitan area, they're seeing a sizable drop in transit ridership because the federal employees are no longer commuting, and that was the largest ridership. So there's a lot of things that we don't know as we try and affect behavioral changes by raising prices for tolls, by closing streets, by cutting off streets, by trying to get people to telecommute or shop online. And then there's also, within the transportation realm, there are many, many more actors now than there have been in decades. We are in what I like to consider a new golden era of private transit. And this may or may not be good, We will have to see what happens with that, but I'm sure you've all heard of Uber. This is a dramatic increase in taxi cabs. Taxi cabs are a form of public transit. One of our guests who was supposed to be here tonight, Matthew George, is the CEO of a company called Bridj. And Bridj is a private bus operator in Boston, and they have dreams of becoming the Uber of buses. And in New York, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Via. Via is an on-demand van pool service that you can get between 34th Street and 110th Street in Manhattan. And it's $5 a ride. And you hail it on your smartphone, and they come and pick you up, and they'll drop you off anywhere in their service area for $5. And then you have Lyft, and you have Sidecar, you have commuter shuttles. Every suburban campus now has shuttles that come into the center city to pick up employees and bring them back out to these suburban campuses. Many of you have probably heard about the tech buses and the Google buses that exist in San Francisco. Those buses exist in New York. There's a company called RidePal, which is just focused on delivering commutes by bus to small employers who are located both in the suburbs and in our central cities. Taken together, what this means is over the next few decades, the changes in our transportation system are going to be much, much greater than the changes in our built environment and our land use. The buildings that are around us here are the buildings that have been here for decades. Over 75% of all the buildings in New York City are original construction. The land use and the built environment is very durable, but our transportation systems are very pliable. And we're in it because of all the data, because of all the information, much of which we're going to hear about tonight. We really have an opportunity to have a very flexible, pliable transportation system that adapts to our urban environment as it is. In turn, our urban environment will then adapt to our new transportation technologies and our new use of data, but we really don't have a good sense as far as how to predict what that outcome will be. For those of you who are interested in design of the streets, this has tremendous influence for how we should think about street design. If you think about what happens at the curb, I consider the curbs of our streets the wetlands of our cities, right? The streets themselves are the rivers and the waterways. The land is the sidewalk and the buildings. And nobody thinks about the wetlands. Nobody thinks about the curb. But at the curb, we have buses, we have taxis, we have parking, we want bike lanes, we have people ducking into traffic to pick up taxis, we have freight. We have all kinds of things that are happening at the curb. We know nothing about it. We don't know how to redesign our streets for all of these choices. We don't know how to think about how do we allocate space on our streets to ensure safety. And many of these are normative issues. How do we prioritize what we want to prioritize? We're coming out of an era in transport planning where we prioritize automobility at the expense of everything. And now, certainly in planning and in architecture, the broad trends are let's prioritize people. And that's going to play out very, very differently as we move forward in our city building. So, so that's sort of an overview of why we're interested in information. That the information age of transportation is going to be very, very different than the infrastructural age of transportation. And to have information, or to use information is to use data. And we have 3 speakers tonight, all of whom are very cleverly using data to improve our travel options, to improve our, the way we use the existing systems, and also discovering how we use systems that we don't know anything about. Charles Komanoff is an economist who has been working for years tirelessly on issues of the environment, and also putting together the world's largest spreadsheet on how tolls will affect travel in New York. He's doing a lot of work with Sam Schwartz on his Move New York plan. And Charles is going to talk about the information that goes into thinking about a new and fair way to toll charge drivers for their externalities on our systems. Sarah Williams, who was a colleague of mine at Columbia and is now at MIT, is going to talk about her work with digitalMatatus. She went to Nairobi, and using mobile phone technology, she was able to map a transit system that nobody knew anything about. And there's a lot of these systems that exist. In New York, I do a fair amount of work on informal transit. I've been looking at the dollar vans that exist in Brooklyn and Queens. These are informal transit systems that are used by hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, and we know nothing about them. And this is an area where data helps us learn about how people actually interact with their city. And then Josh is going to talk about his work where he's trying to provide better information to travelers. And by providing better information to travelers, it makes it easier for them to switch modes when they need to, easier for them to adapt as the weather goes bad or there's delays on trains or other things. And so this is connecting travelers with real-time data in a way that simply was impossible not that long ago. And we don't have, from a research perspective, we don't have a good sense as to how these will affect the design of our cities, the function of our cities, the interaction we have with our transportation systems. But it's going to be very interesting to figure that out as we work through these over the next decade or so. So I am going to bring up Charles Komanoff as our first speaker, and each speaker will speak for about 10 minutes, and there will be ample time for questions at the end. So we'll hold all questions until all speakers have had a turn. Great. Thank you.
Wow, that was great.
Once a certain traffic density is surpassed, well, what is that density? But once it is, the critical point, every driver contributes involuntarily to a slowing of traffic. You know, you're in a car, you slow down everybody else. Well, okay, fine. But past a certain point, the time that that driver steals from all the others by slowing them down, the aggregate time is greater many times over than the time that he or she might have hoped to save by taking the car. So it's a tragedy of the commons, it's an externality problem, and actually we've got that a driver who's going to be driving into or through a congested area, is that driver aware of how much time he or she is going to lose because of all the other vehicles and drivers on the road? You betcha. You know, we're all smart enough, and we know that traffic is going to slow us down, and so maybe we'll reschedule a trip or reroute the trip. But drivers are heedless of the extent to which our trips slow down everybody else's. There is no reason for us to care unless you're really an altruist. Are you going to be worried about the fact that, well, gee, if I take the car today, I'm going to slow down that car by 8 seconds, and this one by 7 seconds, and this one by 20 seconds because I'm in front of them at this queue or that queue, etc. But that non-necessity of caring is what creates traffic jams, if you will, that people do not face the time cost that they impose on others by choosing to drive. Now, I have quantified, I believe I've quantified, for trips that are going into the Manhattan CBD, the Central Business District, Manhattan, south of 60th Street. And so this graph, I am going to spend a little bit of time. Have I got a laser arrow?
The center.
That's what this, very cool, okay. So these magenta bars are all equal, and that's because the model that I've got, and it's sort of too bad, but it's too late. It's the way the model was built. I assumed 7 years ago when I started that model that if we had congestion pricing, we would only charge drivers to go in, and we wouldn't charge them to drive back out. So I wasn't concerned about when people came out. And if you think about it, if somebody's going to be driving into the CBD, the Central Business District, at 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, we don't know when they're coming out. So I had to assume in my calculations that those were all going to be, it's the green thing again? Yeah, that these would be the same. But look at the variation in the blue, which is the amount of time that the individual trip takes away from the aggregate of all the other vehicles on the road. And what this is saying is that if you drive in during the morning peak period, which I define as 6 to 9 in the morning, you will slow down all the other vehicles on the road. And this is for a typical trip to the CBD, which might be about 18 miles. You will slow them down by an aggregate of about 2.5 hours. You won't slow any one individual down by more than 10 or 20 or 30 seconds, depending upon the configuration of traffic. But the aggregate, you will slow down by that much. And of course, this varies very considerably by time of day. There is a tiny little blue bar in the so-called graveyard shift in the middle of the night, but that's essentially de minimis. Is there a question?
No, 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. So now, how did I come to calculate those numbers? So I'm going to take you now a little bit into this model. And the model, I think I've got a link to it or a hint to how to find it. It's on the web. You can download it. It's not necessarily, well, it's not that big a spreadsheet. It's only 5 megabytes, which is like nothing, right? But if we had all the cells and all the pages on a wall at some point, I should calculate this. It would probably be about as big as the biggest skyscraper in the city in terms of the cross section. It is really quite huge. So I divide the roads between the CBD and the approaches to it. I have these speed volume equations, which are based on empirical data, curve fitting. And then the way that I derived these numbers was to say, let's say we add 1 trip. I actually added 100 trips because the math becomes a little bit easier. We now have an equilibrium. And if you add 1 trip at any point of the day, the model will calculate how much traffic slows down. So if it's now, say within the CBD, 10 miles an hour, when you've added 100 trips, it will be 10.002 miles per hour, or whatever it is. Not that big of a deterioration, but you then integrate that over all of the vehicles that are being impacted, and you get these numbers here. So the remedy to all this, an economist would say, is to internalize these externalized time costs into the price of a trip, and then apply the revenues, because we're going to be generating revenues with these tolls, or net revenues once you pay for the tolling system. So we can reduce the burden of unfair current tolls, and what the Move New York plan proposes to do is to toll all the entrances to and exits from the central business district, and use part of that revenue to cut pretty much in half the tolls on the outer borough MTA bridges like the Verrazano and the Triborough. And there are both equity reasons and political reasons to be doing that. And to invest the rest of the money mostly in subways to maintain a state of good repair, etc. So the ideal proposal would have the congestion charge varying with the time of day, as we saw in the blue bars, and also to set a level of the charge that would maximize the total cost, the total benefits minus cost. But the practical, if we want to have a snowball's chance to pass this plan, is instead we match. Game theory suggests if you're going to do something innovative and radical, you want to try to hook onto existing default values. Well, the default values, there is now a toll to enter the central business district on the Queens Midtown or the Brooklyn Battery tunnels, even though the 60th Street is not tolled, and even though the 4 East River bridges are not tolled. So this is what the toll is. We will charge that. Those tolls are constant. We will do that too. We'll follow the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, not confuse people with a very time-varied thing. And the level of the toll is less than the societal optimum. That's just the way that it is. This is sort of a tour in the model, and I don't know that we're going to be able to go through that. Maybe in questions we can. But here's the point: you increase the price to drive into the CBD. That will reduce the number of trips. But once you've done that, then car travel is more efficient. You can go faster. So there'll be a rebound. How much of a rebound depends upon the relative size of price elasticities and time elasticities, and you can vary all these things in the model. But the model then iterates all this until you reach an equilibrium. Meanwhile, you've got trips either bailing out to or coming in from transit and taxis. If you invest in transit, you'll reduce car volumes further because you'll be improving the efficiency of transit. You iterate that to equilibrium. There's a lot of tabs in the model, and if you want to find the model, just Google BTA 1.1. The cost benefit, or the benefit cost. Some things to note here is that the environmental values, less carbon, I think is, fewer crashes is red, less carbon is green. I put a carbon price on that. Less oil extraction is black, cleaner air and less noise. This is not an enormous bar. What's really big is that transit riders will save time and drivers will save time, which suggests that maybe Mayor Mike Bloomberg made a strategic mistake in 2007 when he tried to sell congestion pricing as a green plan. It is a green plan to the extent that it will make the densest city in the Western Hemisphere work better, and cities are inherently green. But don't try to sell this plan on the basis of cleaner air. And so what are the next steps? We have a 6-month legislative window to pass this plan. The model can vary the pricing, but we don't, as I said, in our plan. But I have to be candid. Maybe this plan, the Move New York plan, is a last gasp at a dying model, because it is now digitally possible to be able to track and therefore toll vehicles granulated not just by time of day, but by price and congestion level. And there is something about the binary nature of, you pay $5.33 to cross a line, and if you didn't cross that line, you pay $0. It's very chunky and clunky and binary. Maybe we won't get there. So there are going to need to be either enhancements of this model or brand new models that will enable us to at least propose to advocacy groups and elected officials ways to internalize those externality costs and achieve a more efficient and hopefully a more equitable transportation system, at least as far as driving is concerned.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. So Josh Crandall is our next speaker.
Fantastic. Okay, so I have come to run a business called Clever Commute, and I just want to take a few minutes and let you know what it's about. That's me. So, up at the top, that's kind of the hypothesis that was put to us. How can we harness existing data? And we've kind of talked about that a bit. So what I did was back in 2006, as a frustrated suburban commuter, I banded together some of my fellow passengers and said, how about we share information with each other when there's a problem? If you think about suburban rail, New Jersey Transit Metro North Long Island Railroad. So whenever there's a sick passenger or a signal problem or switches or delays or any of the stuff that happens, if you happen to do that commute, you'll know what I mean. How can we share it with each other? And this was back in the BlackBerry days. So we were sharing stuff via email, and it was cool. And this is what I did during my, I had a day job in technology. But along the way, a lot has changed, and it's been a slow but steady change in the technology ecosystem. So the transit providers have started to do a better job of sharing information, and we talk. Some people ask me, "Well, are they your competitors?" And I say, "No, not at all. They're just other players in the field." There's been a technical evolution. I talked about that a bit in my next slide. And then certainly the commuter expectations have changed. The commuters expect a lot from their technology, and if you rewind back to 2006, with no apps, no smartphones, none of that stuff. So it's been a challenge to keep up with it, but a good challenge. So this has been what's happened to me as I've tried to run a data-based business. It started out very simple with 5 of my buddies and email, and then it got harder. But some of these things have made it easier. Look at that, social technology, again, didn't exist, now it does. Smartphones, all of these things. The cloud has enabled me as an entrepreneur to do things that I could not have done years ago. So there's no servers that I need to worry about. There's no technology that I need to own and manage. It's been an amazing experience in how you can run a data-based business through really a collection of monthly subscriptions to your various hosting providers. There are amazing things out there that have been enabled, me through the cloud. Business models have changed also. At first it was a slam dunk. Oh, you can run an information-based business. Well, the first wave was don't worry about it, you'll figure it out later. And then it became, advertising's the way. And then it's become subscription services, and then it's in-app purchases, and it will continue to change. And this is my frustration, but my excitement, because I don't know where I'll be in a few years, but so far it's a lot of fun. So what has happened? Crowdsourcing is very interesting. The commuters love to share, but like all social technologies, only a small percentage of the people share. So you hit a point where you've hit the tipping point where you have enough people so that if there's a problem on the Long Island Railroad or in Metro North, somebody will share. But then expectations from the commuters are high. They want to know even more. So what's happened is that I still have crowdsourced data as a very official, as one cornerstone, but I've started incorporating official data from the transit providers, and that's been an interesting shift. So New Jersey Transit, Metro North, Long Island Railroad are doing a better and better job of sharing information in real time with app developers. Some of it is a bit sanitized, and some of it is a bit political. They share some things, they don't share others. So they're a piece of the puzzle, and that's why we go on to number 3. Social media has also become another feed into our service. There's a lot of good stuff on social media. There's some stuff that's not so good, so we figure out what do we curate for the end user experience. But also as time has gone by, this is where it gets exciting, historical data and algorithmic data. So once you have a lot of history and a lot of knowledge about the flow of data, we can potentially do some interesting things to help the commuters. And I'll show you a couple of examples. And it's data, but it's also we need to present it in a way that's consumable and enjoyable. This is what New Jersey Transit provides. If you've ever been in Penn Station, you've seen the departure board. It's kind of cool. They give it to you on your smartphone. It's a big step ahead of where we were, but it's fairly flat, and it's certainly not custom. So it tells you what track is your train on, when it's leaving, and what the status is. Now this is interesting, right? Because they tell you what track your train is on when they want you to know, and then when they don't want you to know, they pull it away. I hope none of my New Jersey Transit friends are here, but that's the way it works. So here's what Clever Commute does. Without getting into the busyness of our product, we take a customized experience and say, okay, these might be the only 2 train lines that you care about. So we take the noise out of the way. If you don't travel to Princeton, you don't need to know about trains to Princeton. But we also give people kind of the ability to dig deeper and understand what's happening in their commute. So each of these columns of your personalized departure board give you interesting information, including metrics about your commute. So again, what can happen if you're a New Jersey Transit commuter out of Penn Station if you start seeing signs of trouble out of New York Penn, you can perhaps take a PATH train over to Hoboken. If you're a Long Island Railroad commuter and you know things are bad at Penn, you can perhaps go to Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn. But I care a lot about this stuff. I don't know if everyone's so into it, but to the point earlier, it's giving the commuter information, and then they can make decisions. Still using that same infrastructure. Nothing's changing. They're just taking advantage of it in a different way. So this part here is kind of cute. I know you can't read it in the back, but what we do is we actually take historical data and show it to the user so that they know historically what track their train has been on, and we actually do algorithmic stuff to predict what track your train is going to be on. This is a very, very important thing if you're a commuter. Our batting average is actually pretty good. So granular data, pie chart, and prediction. Similarly, for your train, I show you historical instances of problems on your commute. So, sometimes, if you're flying somewhere, the airline apps can show you on-time performance, and maybe you'll make a different decision. I don't know if train commuters are that nimble, but people like to be empowered with that information. But even looking at this stuff on the right, it's, again, you might not be able to read it, but the hypothesis is that the commuters don't have the time or the interest in memorizing the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers schedule, but they do care if they show up at Penn Station and it's full of fans who are maybe intoxicated. They're commuting rookies. They're not. We pros don't want to, be surprised by it. So we let you know if there's a hockey game or a basketball game, whether your monthly tickets are on sale, the matinee Wednesday, all the stuff that commuters care about. And sorry, I care about that stuff a lot. I just want to emphasize that and a summary of recent events. So, and also, we tell you what track, we announce what track your train is on when it has been announced, and shoot it to you as a text message or as an email. And again, I'm not saying this so that you all run and sign up. I'm saying just so you understand the value of the information. Because this is something that the transit providers want to control, and they want it to evaporate. For the 5:33 train, at 5:33, they want that information removed, so that if you show up at 5:33, you've missed it. You haven't missed it. Your train is actually still there. It does not leave until 5:34. So we did, and that's not just like a joke about trains are late. It's actually a fact. So the transit providers build in the delay. They take this off the board, but we persisted and send it to you as a text message. So this is the commuters are getting this is, and I think this is the last slide. So the concept here is that bad infrastructure it is creeping. It's not getting meaningfully better. Some fascinating things are happening, but the physical infrastructure is challenging. The digital infrastructure is getting better. And then the term golden age, it's kind of true for some of the suburban commuters. They not every last 80-90% sit down on the train with their mobile device in front of them, and they're just looking to consume. And the transit providers are making the information available. The social media universe is publishing it. App developers are making it available. So you've got a pleasant conflict there in between the two types of infrastructure. One of my customers said that commuting is a game. We're having a conversation about what's too much information. You don't want people sharing every last thing. And this guy said, you know what? I do want people sharing every last thing. Let me decide. I'll build a filter, and I'll turn things on and off. But commuting is a game, and the way that you win is with information. So let me have it. And that's generally been our MO. And our tools let people filter what they do and do not want to see. And finally, if you rewind to what commuting was, again, suburban rail commuting, let me make sure I'm putting in the ballpark. Suburban rail commuting 10 years ago, the only information that you had was the printed schedule. And that's all you got. There was no digital signage, there was no apps, there was no data feeds and APIs and web services to make the data available. So we're going down a path, and my customers are just, what have you done for me lately? What have you done for me lately? And but it's fun. There's so much more that we, and I don't mean my company, I just mean the technology community can do, and I'm excited about it. I think that's my last one.
So our last speaker is Sarah Williams. We're going to leave New York, and we're going to travel to Nairobi. And I will.
Thanks for inviting me here. I'm really excited to join this conversation. And I think one of the reasons it's really exciting is because one of the things I'm really interested in the Civic Data Design Lab is how we can use data to really affect urban policies. And one example of that is this is an app that I developed in Beijing to collect air quality data during the Olympics. And then we were able to use that to show that there were extreme levels. This is the World Health Standard for air quality in Beijing. And you could see it's 150 micrograms per cubic meter, and then during the Olympics it's 584 on this particular day. And so kind of using data as a way to show the conditions and expose the conditions of our urban environment, but hopefully affect policy. So one of the things I like to say, though, is data visualization is often used to support strategies from the top. And I really think data visualization can work both sides of the force, for good and for evil. And how can we really use data for public good? So I wanted to tell one story today about that, which is called digitalMatatus, and I really want to say that this was a collaboration and couldn't have been done with the various team we had. We had people from the University of Nairobi, Computing and Informatics Center, Center for Sustainable Urban Development at Columbia University, my research lab, a local technology firm, GroupShot, and the support of Rockefeller Foundation. So one of the biggest issues in developing countries is mobility. If you look at Nairobi specifically, it suffers from severe congestion problems. And this is true in Nairobi, but this is true in many rapid developing cities in the global south. And one of the issues with the type of congestion we see is that there's lack of information about where the vehicles are going. So there's lack of information about where the infrastructure is, but there's also lack of information about logistics and routing and how people move about the city. They can help make better plans for the city given the kind of severe congestion problems. So one of the things that our team had done, and this is actually in 2005, and I did this with the Center for Sustainable Urban Development, was create one of the first GIS maps for Nairobi because we needed data about Nairobi. How much flow could roads take, etc. Included in that model, so these are actually roadway and roadway capacity, and then included in that model was information about density. And we created this data set and opened it up for anyone to use, but we also used it for our own transportation model. But one of the key pieces of information that was missing about this data set were the matatus. And matatus are these kind of 13-seater vans, and they really are the main form of public transport in Nairobi. They're called different things in different countries. In Manila, they're called jeepneys, and Lagos, they're called tuk-tuks. So you don't see them just in places like Nairobi, but you see them in many places in the global south. And in Nairobi, 3.5 million people depend upon them every day. Yet that data wasn't in our model to understand and model traffic flows. Just to give you an idea of what a Matatu is, I have a short video. Sometimes it's hard to contextualize what exactly is a Matatu.
If you want to know better, you could be a clever or not, but you're not. You're like a minibus driver from Nairobi. Words like this look like a doctor. It's not like the outside your page. Besides, their name Matatu is derived from the peaceful Hindi words for 3 cents for a ride, which nowadays is more like 30 cents. The fares are raised by the conductors.
Alright, we can stop here. You get the idea. Matatus are kind of run by hundreds of different operators. They compete for businesses by creating interesting designs on their vehicles, and but they also kind of are very flexible and kind of change their fares and so forth. But they do have set routes, and knowing where your route is often hard in Nairobi. One thing is, anybody can be a kind of Matatu operator, and all you need to simply do is go to City Council, and then you can go to, this is a Matatu sign driver. You get a sign of 8. 8 is actually the Matatu that goes into Kibera, and this is one of the Matatu sign drivers in Kibera. We wanted to see where these Matatus going, so we went to the City Council. There's over 130 routes. We know this was actually the listing of routes in City Council for the particular files, and you can see very limited, and they also just tell us generally where they go along the roadway. So this one goes to Lunga Lunga, and then passes Jungle Road and Mathara, but we don't know the actual route that it takes. We know kind of 2 points along the destination, and we know the beginning and terminus stop. So we thought, how can we leverage the ubiquitous nature of cell phone use in Nairobi, Kenya, to capture transit data about the informal transit systems that most citizens depend on? So could we leverage kind of this crowdsourcing technology that we heard about Cleaver, but use it to find out about kind of the actual infrastructure that's being developed? Just to give you a sense, cell phones are really common in Nairobi, and one way to think about that is the M-Pesa system. Actually, people in Nairobi use their cell phones to just purchase movie tickets, cups of coffee. You can actually use M-Pesa on some of the Matatu buses to pay your fare. So the distribution of money is, and the ubiquitous nature of cell phone is really common in Nairobi. Nairobi also has a very thriving technology sector. This is the iHub Center, which actually is a development center to think about how we can develop mobile tech and also applications. IBM made it their head research center for Africa because of the kinds of technology initiatives going on. So we developed an app with the University of Nairobi using local cell phones to collect data along the roadways. And this is actually a University of Nairobi student riding on a Matatu, and what they're doing is they're kind of tracing the route, but also checking in to the stops along the way. I'm actually going to play this video. And so one of the things that we did is we actually decided to capture the data in a GTFS format, which is a text file format that shows latitude and longitude information. It's a little hard to see, but this is printing out kind of each stop and route, latitude and longitude information, and then that actually constructs the routing information. Has anybody heard of GTFS before? Anyone? One person. You guys have all used GTF unknowingly. Whenever you use Google Maps to find your transit data, actually GTFS is the background standard that's being used. So in order for Google to allow you to route your transit, they actually get GTFS data from the MTA or MBTA or whatever the transit agency is. So GTF has become this common standard. So we decided to actually record the data in that. Actually, let's stop and move on because I know I'm short on time. Actually, we created from that data a stylized transit map, and I think we'll just move on. I won't show you the video of it because I don't think I have time. You'll see the transit map, and we could go back if you want to look at it. So GTFS is actually a relational database, which is made up of these series of text files. And one of the issues for GTFS, though, is that it's made for formal systems. And so we actually changed it for an informal system, and we hope that Nairobi will be the first system in Google Maps. We're actually negotiating that with them right now. But one of the things that I wanted to say is when you plot GTFS data on a map, it's really hard to understand. It looks like this mess of information. And what we wanted to do is not just create data for our model, but also create data that anybody could use. And so we actually developed a stylized transit map that is used in Nairobi that allows you to understand the various routes. And we created that model using data, using an engagement strategy that included government, academics, NGOs, Matatu drivers, and the private tech community. We had workshops where they knew about the data that we were collecting and also helped us think about new Matatu routes that we were missing. We worked with the Matatu drivers to actually edit the maps. Actually, this is a fun video. I know I'm over time, but it's really fun to see it. I'll show it really quick. Oh, it might not play. Okay, let's just go forward. We can think about it. But one of the really exciting parts of this project were that the Matatu drivers, who are the real planners of this system, are actually using the map to create new Matatu routes where they saw underserved areas. Let me click next. It's frozen.
Oh.
Okay, so I'm just gonna, if it's frozen, what I'm gonna say is also, okay. So we edited the routes. We had a hackathon, which allowed the Nairobi tech community to actually build apps with the data. There are 2 big apps created with the information now called Sonar and Ma3 Route. And one of the really interesting things about this project, though, is we included all the government, the Matatu owners, but it wasn't until they saw the map that they saw the power of it for their use in kind of politics of Nairobi. And the Nairobi government actually held a press conference where they made it the official Matatu map. So I think one of the interesting things about this project is this really shows how you can leverage kind of crowdsourced technology, work outside of informal structures, but partner with them to create a public benefit. Thanks so much.
Well, this was great. So we heard 3 excellent presentations about different ways of using data to manage our existing systems and different approaches that we might take. I'd like to invite all of our speakers to come up. We have about a half hour or so for questions. I have a question for Josh also to start off with. How easy was it, or what are the changes that you've seen with open data in the time that you've been doing this? You've been in this field for approximately 10 years now. Wow. And so how has that changed over time?
Well, we went from nothing to where we are now, and I don't know what's ahead of us, but I was the guy that raised my hand about GTFS, so I use it. That's been a fantastic boost. We were so decentralized at the beginning that there just wasn't a need or wasn't an understanding of it. But I'm so pleased with what the transit providers are doing. So if I just focus on open data as provided by New Jersey Transit, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad, these guys are putting resources, people, and technology into enabling a community of app developers and hoping that something comes of it. It's such a big leap, and pleased at the way it's gone. I wonder where it's going, and I worry that one day they'll wake up and say, you know what, we're not getting our benefit out of this, and it's pulled away. I don't know what that will do to certain businesses.
Do you get a sense that your clients, the commuters, are they happier? How are they using this data?
It's a good question. Some of it is really actionable. It's the stuff that says, you know, what track is my train on? A track number prediction has discrete value. Sometimes people challenge me and they say, well, you know, the train's running 8 minutes late. What am I going to do with that information? And then so I say, well, some people want to know. It makes you a happier, more in control person. It reduces your stress. Some people value that. It's not, and for some people, it's not for them. So I don't know what my ultimate market penetration will be, but I know it's not going to be 100% because some people are just more zen about their community. They're okay if it's not perfect.
So I'd like to open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions. Yeah.
How do you market your service? Your customers?
Historically, it's been word of mouth. I think I've developed a good relationship with the media. So we get quoted a bit when things are happening and people read about it, and you get this nice circle. We're moving into the app stores. So believe it or not, this has not happened in an app. It will be next month. So there's more discovery. We've got so much room to grow that I'm excited about that.
Yes.
Sarah, can you talk a little bit about you mentioned briefly the political effects of having that map, which is really interesting. I'd love to hear more about that.
Right.
How did people use it? How did people see it as a potential?
Right. I think one of the biggest uses politically was actually by the Nairobi government, in that they are using it to help start a conversation about the Matatu system in general. The Matatu system have also seen as kind of diverse set of operators, and by generating the map, it allowed it to look as though it's one system. The main issue is that the government has avoided addressing it, and so the map actually helped create and generate a conversation about what the future of the Matatu system is. I think probably the more like real world kinds of planning applications that have come off of it is the Matatu drivers themselves taking it on and using, they're the really de facto planners of the system and using the map to actually create new routes in underserved areas of the city. We also have had a number of different NGOs that work in Nairobi use the data to think about planning BRT systems. So by looking at kind of the existing transit on the Matatu, it can help them think about potential BRT. Now, if those BRTs actually happen is another question. So there's a kind of different ways it's being taken upon. Yeah.
Charles had a question.
Yeah, a question for Sarah. So those photographs early on of the Matatu jams are pretty powerful, and it sort of looked like the tragedy of the Commons or the oversupply of taxis in New York City 100 years ago before they were kind of regulated and all that. And is there, by some measure, an oversupply of Matatus? And if there is, like, what might be done about that, and how would your work help?
Right. I wouldn't say that there's an oversupply of Matatus. They get all pretty filled up. I think so. Those two pictures I showed you are Matatu terminus or starting point. So they're kind of like large areas. I mean, but they also are the major vehicles on the roadway. So when you're looking at a road, the majority, similar to New York City, the majority of cars are taxis, and then you have a few other vehicles. I think, they do need, there's probably not enough, but then the problem with that is that they're dangerous and chaotic, and there's a whole bunch of other issues that go along with that. But.
I think I'll just add to that because I'm a Nairobian.
Oh, great.
So what she's saying is true. I can drive in New York. I have no problem with driving in New York. If you tell me to drive in Nairobi, I will tell you, it's okay, I will leave the car on the highway, I will walk. I much prefer to walk. It's a very, they're dangerous, they're not as regulated, they will try to push away the other vehicles out of the way to get the money. But no, it's not an oversupply, we still need plenty. The other problem is that we have so many cars coming onto the road almost every day, and we're not expanding as fast. So that is, but great, thank you so much. I hope the traffic gets better.
Yes?
Well, first of all, you know, as a designer, I knew absolutely nothing. Also, as someone who doesn't drive a car, I mean, I learned so much tonight about the theme of using data to manage existing infrastructures. But I guess my question of is data a useful strategy, let's say, to make the best of a bad situation, or that's the way it appears, a kind of crumbling infrastructure? And a question I guess you probably heard many times is does data potentially sort of distract us or deflect us from really addressing the real problem? And perhaps more important, can data be sort of joined productively with alternative ways of really reconceiving infrastructures in a different way?
Charles, why don't you start with this since you're closest to this?
Well, you know, the kind of standard dystopia of making real-time congestion data available is that everyone will be directed to some alternative route, which will then quickly fill up and replicate in that alternative route the congestion that everybody was trying to avoid by taking it in the first place. And so, again, as the economist and the person concerned about the system costs, I have to come back to that paradigm by which our failure to, it's not our personal failure, but that our system of pricing does not oblige us to be cognizant of the congestion costs that we, through our decisions, impose upon others. And it's that I think has to be fixed. And in terms of Nairobi, and again, we always have then the equity problem, because the person in the wealthy person with the limousine, who's just sort of one person, will not mind paying his or her way through, and will be happy to have the matatus forced off the road if that's, you know, what happens. But ideally, a 13-person vehicle would have, could have, should have more means to pay its congestion costs than a one-person vehicle, because they can spread that cost over the larger base.
And I'll add on that there's many things that data can't do. We know when the George Washington Bridge is going to be congested. We know which roads have potholes in them. And that's not a data problem. But with data, we might learn how people adapt to the system as it changes, and help us change our priorities and adapt our own priorities for where we spend the money we need to on maintaining and fixing the infrastructure that we need to maintain and fix. And I think that that's where the connection between the information and the data can be brought into the practical aspects of running a city, which is we have to have roads that work, we have to have bridges and tunnels that work.
So it's about establishing priorities for future rebuilding.
I think that's part of it. And as Josh, I think, is discovering, we don't really know what happens when people have this data. We don't know what was causing a suburban commuter to drive. What was it that the train was unpredictable because they couldn't figure out which track it was on, which is a strange thing not to be able to predict. Or is it that now some people are more comfortable, so they're going to use transit more often, which is going to put a larger strain on the transit system because they're more comfortable with using transit on a daily basis. And that'll take a little stress off of the auto system, which will affect Charles's work. And so we don't really know how, as data becomes pervasive and how we respond to these new, sort of the new management of our transport systems. We really just don't know how that's going to be played out behaviorally. And there's also, from a design perspective, there's a lot to think about, not just with the streets, but what should our buildings look like. Right now, certainly in suburbia and just about everywhere outside of the core of Manhattan, parking requirements are the dominant feature of the American landscape, and in many cases the international landscape. And what happens if we don't have to build parking as much? And all of a sudden our buildings, they don't have a relationship to the parking lot, they have a relationship to something else. And that will have a cascading effect on walking. And if you're already walking, if you've left the house as a pedestrian, you're more likely to take transit than you are to drive because your car is going to be back at home. So there's a lot of things that we don't know as data and these behavioral aspects work their way through the system. It'd be nice to know, but we don't. And transportation is, and planning in many ways is a predictive field. And we're trying to predict the future, but we are at a point now that the future is very much unknown.
Yeah, the question I was exploring and I was kind of like thinking through it is, I think last week, The Economist had a big write-up or essay around the fact that cities are diminishing and the suburbs are growing, and I think Professor Angel was one of the people who written about that article. He used to be my professor. And so I was wondering, and you talking about Uber and how this all intersects as we go forward and try to see how information will impact us in those kinds of runs. And when you talk about telecommuting, how will that impact us in the future? It's open to.
I mean, I think Uber is really interesting because it's leveraging data to create a whole new system, which we don't have regulations for as of yet. And I think we'll see more. And there are more things there are more apps than Uber available, and I think it has a potential to change the transit landscape. And regulations are not kind of speeding up to deal with those issues. But it's working off of open data in many ways. But the kind of openness that
it's a tricky question, just because there's still something that you had said earlier that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. I think that commuting is a deeply personal thing, and what I mean by that is some people are very nimble, and they'll say, train, bus, I don't care, I'll go to Hoboken, yeah, whatever's best tonight. And a lot of people, then there's reality. Some people say, well, I get car sick on the bus, I don't care for that, or I can't take a different train home tonight because my train's parked at that train station. And when I get back to my town, I'll have a problem. So again, even as you were saying earlier, what's the impact? I don't know, but some things are going to be incremental. Some changes, there's going to be some people who will change their behaviors, and we can predict what will happen. I don't know what the size of that core is. That's either not going to change or change very slowly. People say to me, oh, Josh, it'd be great if you could tell me how I should go home tonight. And then when I say, take the bus, they go, well, I get bus sick. And they go, okay, don't take the bus. But it gets very complicated, and back to this statement, very personal. And I don't mean, intimate, I just mean everyone has their own preference.
But couldn't you put it into your system somehow, so you could already list, like, okay, I get car sick on the bus, I don't like the train if it's after 6, or things like that.
Technically, it's possible, and I would love to get there. I'm just working on priorities that are a little closer to my nose. I don't think it's
no, do that. And that should be sort of on your app, on your phone, so that when you use Josh's service or any other service, you are already steered away from something, or there's a constraint or a weighting built in that will optimize you in the face of your own personal proclivities.
Just real quickly, if I could just add.
Yeah.
So Uber is now advertising on Clever Commute. I think that's a great thing, and I don't see them as a competitor. I want people to know about it. There's some class of people for whom a private car is a good solution when the trains aren't running well.
Or the person whose car is parked here and is now going to be rerouted there,
Fair
she
enough.
can get home with,
Did you want to follow up?
Well, I guess maybe put it in a different way. One of the fascinating themes that I'm hearing is that data right now is being used to help us manage a horrific infrastructure. It's a lot about managing vehicles, which many of us feel like is the essence of the problem. And it seems to be motivated by a desire, which I completely understand. Not to be personal, for 25 years I've been commuting between New York and Princeton, New York and New Haven, so I know both these systems. And I've once calculated, I've spent over years of my life on the train. So I'm not underestimating how important your service is to optimize my individual commuting experience and time. But I'm wondering, are there ways that data could be used in other ways to talk about other kinds of, sort of qualitative experiences that also impact how we use infrastructure? And also, I get the personal and customization, okay, which again I appreciate, but there was a moment in this gentleman's presentation that I found personally fascinating when you were describing the metrics and saying that the decision that I make to use my car isn't just about me, but that's what I thought was the most interesting thing that I heard tonight, was that it has a huge impact on other people. And I think it also asks us, can data be a way of not just reinforcing the individual, the personal, and the selfish in a way of sort of, using media to mediate experience and maybe to expand a greater public good?
That's a good question.
Well, you must be thinking about this all
Well,
the time.
I would add a couple of things to that. I think that we don't know, because it's so new. We have, I mentioned in my opening remarks that we're in a new golden era of private transit. And a lot of the big data and the open data is actually siloed data. How many of you know how many rides Uber gives in a year? Unless you work for Uber, nobody knows.
No.
Actually, the data is easily hackable.
Yeah, okay, so the data is easily hackable.
We have to talk. I need that.
So that.
Not a loophole in this stuff.
So okay, so we'll chalk that up to the wonderful private policies of Uber. But for instance, we hear about how great it is, we hear about how popular it is, but there's no public data about that. We don't know. When City Bike comes in, City Bike is tremendously popular, lots of rides. We have no idea where those rides came from.
Sorry. Excuse me. No, because everybody can see where
We know where they're going, but we don't know. Those rides were
for
not.
City Bike, what would those?
Yeah, so we know that some of those rides came from walking. Some of them came from the transit system. I've been doing some work to identify that some of these rides came from taxi cabs. Did any of those rides come from private automobiles? Maybe, but that's probably the least of the source. Are they new rides? Were these trips that previously were not taken at all? So we have all of these data about City Bike, about the vehicle trip. We know nothing about the individual. We know, I mean, we can connect the individual a bit in terms of their annual license, but we know almost nothing about the individual. And we see a lot of stuff these days about using visualizations of the taxi GPS data. And I've been working with the taxi data for years. These are all just vehicle trips. We know nothing about the passenger. We know a little bit about the driver, but the driver and the passenger don't have aligned preferences, which is one of Charles's points with these shifting preferences. And so, and one of the reasons we regulate taxis is because we're protecting the passenger from the driver. Taxis are known as a credence good. Just like a surgeon. If the surgeon tells you that you need an operation, you believe them. They have a degree, they know something about the innards of your body, and you just know you feel badly. If you're getting in a taxi and you're a visitor, you don't really know the right route. You don't know how much it's supposed to cost to go from here to the Upper East Side. The taxi driver does, so that's why we regulate these things, because they're credence goods. And so there's a lot of these issues at hand, and so we have to be very careful about the data that we have, the data that we're getting, and make sure that we're also keeping our eye on the data that we want, which is one of the things that's so wonderful about Sarah's work, is it's going out and finding this hole of information, saying, we know that there's millions of people getting around the city somehow that are unaccounted for. And then let's go out and find that.
I think it's really interesting to bring up the qualitative aspect of data, because I think it's important not to forget that we both are like really looking at kind of quantitative mechanisms, but those have to be matched up with qualitative interests and concerns. Otherwise, the types of plans we make are going to be kind of one-sided or kind of driven by the biases in our data. I think some of the open source apps are really great in helping to bring in some of that qualitative information. So I would say, like in the case of Nairobi, they built the apps, and then actually they have crowdsourcing mechanisms on top of it, because actually the Ma3 route that I kind of just flashed through actually allows you to crowdsource so people use it mostly to see what's going on with the Matatus, because it is a major point of contention in the cities. Just like we like to talk about our subway, people like to talk about the Matatus, so it's all over Twitter. And that Ma3 app brings all that data geolocated into the routing app and allows users to navigate in between those two, so that you can see, okay, well, if I want to take Route 8 to Canberra, oh, there's an accident here, there's also this going on here. This is the experience, other kinds of experiential issues, information about the driver, being drunk, etc. Which is it's pretty common actually. But that's the same with your type of app, is that you're kind of providing this kind of base information on the transit system, and what really brings that kind of qualitative experience, or our ability to have kind of that qualitative experience. I think there's stuff that needs to be done, like what on the ground, what kind of other kinds of infrastructure issues, but you can get at kind of your community through some of the kind of crowdsourcing.
Yeah. It's a lot of the clever commute stuff is metrics driven. How many times was this train late or delayed or canceled? That's interesting. And then some people share information such as the train is crowded or standing room only, or there's the air conditioning's not working or the heat's not working. Again, for some people, they'll say, I'll stay away from that train, or I'll let them know, I'll catch the next one. Some people say, I don't care, I need to go to work. So it's a little bit subjective, but it helps some people. And it fascinates me what presses people's buttons.
Adam, did you have a question?
So what was interesting to me with you guys is you each seem to have some form of official data you were working with, or interplay with official actors, and sort of data you were creating, let's say unofficially. It was your own, it was made however you could get it or come up with it. I guess where I'm sort of going with this idea is how was like the data that you created versus any sort of official source or official actor, how I want to say like valuable did you find your own data versus that official source? Like, is there data that you would want to remain unofficial?
Yeah. They're different, and I think that when we first, before New Jersey Transit used to electronically publish track number information, we crowdsourced it, and it was largely accurate. The train's on track 6, and nobody would say it wasn't. So that is valuable, and I'm happy that we get it electronically. They're just separate. I'm glad that I have both types of data. And I hope that's enough of an answer. People they value having both.
Right.
The transit providers recognize what they say has to be right, and I respect that. Like they cannot say something unless it's been vetted and is accurate and meets their internal policies, and that's because they're serving a large, heterogeneous community. Our group is kind of self-selected, and they've got tolerance for things that aren't either fully disclosed or fully accurate. So, and when you use Clever Commute, you know what you're getting and you know where it comes from, and then there's room for both. Is that enough of an answer?
Sure. I think I could open it up to everyone on there to talk. But,
we have time for one more question. So,
I have a question. Talked about a lot of data collection. How does privacy play in? I know I always hate don't send stuff to Google. So how does that play into the data collection y'all do?
That's not something that's a problem for me, because all of my data are aggregate. They're all from the multiplicity of transportation agencies that operate in the region, and the data do seem to be really high quality. And all that I do with that is thousands of algorithms that purport to say, if you take the current equilibrium and perturb it in a whole bunch of, or one or a different way after another. It doesn't just have to be tolls. We can say, oh, what if we take a certain number of lane miles in the central business district and repurpose them from motor vehicles to other uses such as cycling, walking, or public plazas? By how much would that be predicted to worsen travel speeds in the CBD, which in turn might drive a certain number of drivers to public transit, which in turn might change somewhat the revenues that we derive from tolls or fares. So, you know, for me, I'm not getting any individual data. And again, you know, when I said that my binary toll conception in some ways maybe belongs in the past century, well, in some ways my model might do that. You know, maybe it's like the last great gasp of 1999, because it's not crowdsourced, it rather comes from the gigantic bureaucracies that, for better or for worse, provide us with transportation.
Everybody who participates in are actively generating data. I mean, they know that they're contributing it. We don't record any information about them, so, but they do have to agree to participate in sending us information.
Do you find that most people are okay with that? They don't think it's like, you know, spaceships are coming sort of thing?
Right. I mean, they're interested in having better information about their routes, and at this point we're not using that data in any way to kind of profit, so they're okay with it. Like, it's not a profit-driven mechanism. Yeah.
And as an entrepreneur, we're intrigued by this thing. So we're just going into the app world. It used to all be email-based. We really didn't track, you know, where you are. And of course, today's devices can pinpoint where you are and how fast you're moving. So it's giving us a lot of interesting opportunities. And when I started moving into the app, you know, everyone said, that's great, you could put it all on a map and you could turn every commuter into a beacon. And I think that doesn't feel right. I think if you have something to share, you should press the share button and do that in a fully disclosed way. But there are apps out there that just turn you into a data point. You know, they think that those entrepreneurs think that just drawing a real-time map, like this horizontal infrastructure in any city, is a viable model. And maybe they are ways, but quite successful. To put it mildly, ways, you know, sold for over $1 billion. So there's something to be said, but it's not. It doesn't feel good to me. No.
Well, we have to wrap up this part of the program now, but we're all going to be around for a few more minutes for additional conversation and questions. So I'd like to have a round of applause for the presenters. And thank you everyone for coming.